When we got to the shop, I think he sensed my disappointment as I stared at the selections. "What one do you want?" "It isn't which one I want, but what I can afford. I've only got twopence left. I think I'll have to get a postcard instead." "That's not a problem." He always seemed to be saying that, and he pulled me inside the shop. He pointed to the largest one on the tray and said to the man behind the counter, "I'd like that one, please." "No, I can't. That one is fourpence." "That's not a problem." Again. And he took the twopence from my hand and added 2 more pennies from his pocket. The deal was done and I didn't have any option but to accept. "I can't pay you back." "Unless perhaps I could send it to you by post." "No, don't bother, it's all right." "Well, I want to. Write your name and address in my book and I'll send it back in postage stamps when I next get some pocket money." "I don't need you to, but I would like to get a letter from you." He wrote his address in my book below the sketch of the tree growing out of the rock. "Come on, it's 2:30. Let's get down to the beach for your paddle." When we got to the beach, I sat on the wall beside the pavement to take off my shoes and socks. "No, not a good idea. The shore's very stony until you get near the water. You won't like walking on that with bare feet. Come on, we'll take them off near that rock." We picked our way over the pebbles to the rock. It had obviously been under the water at high tide and was black, and shiny limpets were stuck on it. I tried to get one off so that I could show it to Miss Williams, but it was slippery and wouldn't come off. He took off his shoes and socks, tied the laces of his shoes together and hung them round his neck, then rolled up his trousers to above his knees. I took mine off and put them in my bag. The sand felt cold and wet. My feet sank into it and the sand got between my toes. It felt nice. We walked to the edge of the sea. I walked into it until the water was around my ankles. It was very cold, but after a few minutes I didn't notice at all. The waves came in and the water reached my calves. It was lovely and I wanted to stay there all day, looking out over the vast ocean, but the wave receded and I felt as though it was pulling me in when the sand was sucked from beneath my feet. Richard caught me round the waist. "Oops! Nearly had to call out the lifeguards. You should stand with your feet further apart. Are you all right?" "Yes, not a problem." I hoped he didn't think that I was being cheeky, but I smiled and I think he was enjoying it too. His arm was still round my waist, but I didn't want him to remove it. "Look, what's that?" Just a piece of wood by the look of it. It was about 10 yards out and moving with the waves. As the waves came in, it was nearly in reach, and then when they receded it was carried back with them and out of reach again. "I've got to take something back to our teacher from the beach, so that would do." "Well, it's only a piece of wood. What's good is that?" "Well, who knows? It might have been in the sea for years. Perhaps it was once part of a pirate ship, or maybe it has travelled all the way from some South Sea island. It may be some exotic wood that we've never seen in this country." Richard smiled again. More of a grin, perhaps. Very like cheeky Charlie, but just as nice and teased. Or, of course, it could be just some rubbish thrown from a tanker ship. But the next time a wave brought it in near, Richard ran into the water. The waves were breaking over his knees and soaking his trousers. He snatched at it before the waves could reclaim it and triumphantly handed it to me, rather like a retriever dog would lay a pheasant at its master's feet. Thank you, but your trousers are all wet." "I'm so sorry, I didn't want you to do that." "It's not a problem." Richard didn't seem to see anything as a problem. "What time is it?" 2:50. "Sorry, I've got to go." He didn't say it was a problem this time, and we walked back to the rock to put on our socks and shoes. When we'd both got them on, he took hold of me round the waist and leaned me against the wet limpet-covered rock. He looked into my eyes and said, "It's been nice being with you. I wish I could see you again. I'd better leave you here though, so that your friends don't see us and start asking you questions. The town hall is just up the road." Before I could reply, he kissed me on the cheek and walked away. I saw the bus and a few girls waiting to get on it. I hurried to join them and hoped that Mrs. Bradshaw wouldn't see me and ask why I was on my own. Henrietta was at the back of the bus and waved as I entered. I didn't want to sit with her, so I raised my hands and pointed to a seat next to Miss Williams, hoping that she would think that Miss Williams had ordered me to sit there. On the journey home I thought of all the things we'd done. I thought about Richard's kiss. I thought about the letter I would write to him. I would get the stamp on Saturday when I'd finished my jobs. If I got 2 penny stamps instead of 1 tuppenny one, then he would be able to use them to write 2 letters back. What would I say in the letters? Should I mention his kiss? Would he write? Why did he walk away? The journey home didn't seem to take as long as the outward journey. I was tired but excited to get home, to tell everybody all about the wonderful things that I'd seen and done. If I ran from the school, I reckoned that I could be home before Jane and Charlie were put to bed. Mum, Dad and Tom would be there, but I expected that Ralph would be with his friend Raymond as usual, but he could have his share of the present later. Mum was waiting on the doorstep as I ran down the road. I waved to a group of neighbours as I passed and arrived breathless. "Oh, Mum, I've got so much to tell you." "Calm down, lass, there's plenty of time for that later. Get your tea first." I followed her indoors. Charlie rushed to me, grabbing at my bag. "You smell like poo." "So do you." Mum dragged him off and cuffed him about the ear, which didn't seem to bother him, and sat him in his small chair in front of the fire. The table was laid with just one place set for me. "Sit you down, you must be famished. I've saved you some nice haslet and fried potatoes." I sat down and put my bag at my feet to guard it, and was about to tell them all about the museum and the beach and the fairground and everything, when Mum grabbed at my shoulders and spun me round, nearly pulling me off the chair. "What's this?" "What?" "This. Don't play the innocent with me." "Filthy ruin. What the hell you been doing? I paid good money." "I don't know what you mean." "How did it get like this?" "Like what?" "Filthy black slime down the back, that's what." "I don't know." "Not know? Course you know." "I don't know, Mum. Must have been when Richard leaned." "Richard? Who's Richard?" "A boy we met at the—" "Boy? What the hell are you doing meeting boys?" "Henry took me to—" "I thought she'd be in there somewhere." "Well, we only—" "The sooner you stop going round with her the better." "But she wasn't with me when—" "I've had enough of this. Get up in your room, out of my sight." It wasn't the homecoming I hoped for. I went to the room and took off the blouse. It was stained with the slime from the rock, and worse, there was a small rip, probably caused by the limpets. I undressed and got into bed. I hid my bag under the bed. There was no way that I could give them the present tonight, and I wondered if I ever would. Charlie came up shortly afterwards, although it wasn't really his bedtime, looking very grumpy. I heard Ralph come home, and he too came into the room before he usually did. "It's all your fault. What you been doing to put Mum in such a rotten mood?" "Nothing. Mind your own business." "'Tis my business if I get sent to bed early as well. Hard luck, you're hardly here anyway." "Come on, Charlie, we better keep out of her way if she's going to be like this." And he picked him up and rolled him on the bed. I'll tell you something Mum said about her. What? She's been going with boys. I don't expect this had any meaning for Charlie, but they spent much time rolling about on the bed with much whisperings and giggles. I turned my back on them and buried my head beneath the pillow. It was dark when Dad came into the room. I wasn't asleep. I'd been thinking about the day. I'd been thinking how unkind it was of Henrietta to make me go on the fairground, when I realised that it was her intention to find some boy to mess about with, and that she didn't really care what happened to me. I didn't come to any conclusion as to how I would tell her that I didn't really want to be her friend anymore. But my annoyance was tempered when I realised that if she hadn't, then I wouldn't have been paddling with Richard. Dad tiptoed to my bed and put a mug of cocoa and a plate of biscuits on the table. Thelma, are you awake? Yes. I brought you a drink. Thank you. And Dad, what? I'm really sorry about spoiling the blouse. I didn't know that I had. We weren't doing anything wrong. He's a nice boy, and it was only because of him that I was able to paddle in the sea. We had to put our shoes and socks on against a rock, and I suppose I must have leant on it. Yes, we know, we know. Don't you worry about that. Like all things, it will all come out in the wash. We whispered to each other. Ralph and Charlie, we assumed, were asleep, and then he sat on the bed and he said, Mum and me have been talking, and we think it's time that you had your own bedroom. Tomorrow Tom will come in here and you'll have his room. But he and Ralph will fight, and Charlie will be in the middle of it. No, they won't. I can guarantee it. You leave them to me. Further discussion was prevented because Charlie jumped out of his bed shouting, No, 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 no! He rushed to Dad with his fist clenched, tears streaming down his face, and punched at Dad's legs. Dad grabbed him, and I thought that he was going to smack him, but he didn't. He picked him up, wrapped one arm around him, preventing him from lashing out with his fists, and held one foot in his large hand, bending his leg up to immobilize it. Charlie continued to wriggle and kick with his other free leg. Shush, 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 shush. There, now, don't cry. Everything will be all right. Shush. Charlie gradually calmed down and stopped kicking. Dad released his hold on his leg and took him off his lap and stood him on the floor in front of him. Dad seemed so large, and Charlie so tiny and helpless. He was still crying and his body shaking. Dad put his hands on his shoulders and said, Charlie, you're a big boy now. You'll be going to school soon, and it's time all your boys were together. Thelma needs a room of her own. You can still sleep with Ralph, and Tom will have Thelma's bed. He picked him up and gently put him back in his bed, and to both of us he said, Now go to sleep. It'll all seem better in the morning. He tiptoed out of the room. Ralph hadn't stirred. Perhaps he wouldn't think the morning was better.